All right, welcome back to the deep dive. You have sent us a truly fascinating collection this time, but I have to say, also quite bewildering.
Yeah, bewildering is a good word for it.
It really doesn't feel like a neat folder of documents, does it?
Yeah.
It's more like fragments you've somehow pieced together, almost like archaeological findings, dug up from somewhere dense and deep and, well, fundamentally strange.
Yeah, strange. That really hits the nail on the head. We're looking at transcripts. Some seem pretty clean, others
Yeah.
definitely not. And then there are these notes from analyses, glimpses into specific YouTube videos, even song lyrics.
It's a lot.
It is. And it all seems to orbit around this core idea, this group called the DOSA Crew or maybe the DOSA Projects.
Hmm.
And what's really interesting is how some of the analysis you've included, it even engages with other analyses, like those cats and gold notes. It's like layers upon layers.
It's a complex web, absolutely. And
Right.
just the sheer range of it all. It's compelling, no doubt, but also genuinely perplexing at times. You get these moments of really detailed, almost academic, kind of lyrical analysis.
Right. Really deep dives into the words.
And then suddenly you're looking at discussions that feel like they're pulled from, I don't know, deep internet chats or maybe private notes. And then those are right alongside these raw, really noisy transcriptions that are just, well, full of errors, half thoughts, sometimes just noise.
And the content itself is just a wild ride, isn't it? One minute you're trying to wrap your head around these really abstract concepts. The next you're plunged into incredibly aggressive language, or you're trying to follow these surreal, almost mythic kind of stories.
And then bam, suddenly you hit these super intense technical details about like weapons or strange technologies,
It really feels like stepping into its own distinct universe.
doesn't it? But maybe a universe that's been somehow shattered and we're just trying to understand it by looking at all the broken pieces.
And that's a great way to put it. It
Right.
absolutely feels like looking at the world, or at least their world, through a shattered mirror. The reflections are there, but they're all distorted, fragmented, multiplied.
So our mission here, wading through all this material with you, the listener, is to take these fragments, these bits that maybe seem chaotic or disconnected at first glance.
And see if we can find some kind of underlying structure. Can we maybe filter out the essence?
Can we tease out the core ideas, maybe find some surprising connections that link these wildly different pieces together? Our goal really is to help piece together something that helps make sense of this world, this artistic vision that seems to be described in the sources you've shared.
Yeah, try to build some kind of coherent picture from the chaos.
We're going to try and look across all of it, the lyrical stuff, the weird transcripts, the notes on myth and tech, the insights into how they interact with their audience, and just see what kind of picture emerges. It's a lot, but let's just dive right in.
Okay.
When you look at this, a whole stack of sources, where do you even begin to find a thread? What jumps out first?
Well, for me, the most immediate thing, the element that just hits you right away, is how these sources show the Dosic crew, or whoever is behind this, just twisting and challenging language,
Yeah.
really pushing communication to its absolute extremes,
Oh, yeah.
often at the point where it just breaks down completely.
That was my first impression, too. Just trying to engage with some of this material is, it's a real challenge. A lot of it just isn't designed to be easy to read or listen to. It feels like it actively resists, straightforward consumption.
Precisely. Take that buzzword bingo
Hmm.
source. It's labeled as a transcript, but when you actually try to read it, it feels, well, broken, profoundly broken.
Right.
And the analysis you included points this out, and you can totally see it, that it's probably the result of automated transcription just struggling. Maybe it's picking up background noise. Maybe the speech patterns are just really non-standard, unusual. Who knows?
So what you end up with are these sentences that just stop
Yeah.
mid-thought. Or really weird grammatical constructions, German phrases kind of thrown in that don't quite make sense in the context.
Exactly. And it leaves you, the listener or the reader, in this really awkward spot. You know you're missing something crucial. Like, who's even speaking? What was the full thought? What just happened before this fragment?
You just left hanging.
Yeah, the technology, the thing that's supposed to capture speech, seems to just fundamentally fail or misunderstand what's going on. And the analysis gives it this academic term, violation of conversational maxims.
Okay. What does that mean exactly?
Well, they're those unspoken rules we all kind of follow in conversation to make sense,
Yeah.
right? Like, be relevant, be truthful, be clear, don't ramble on,
Gotcha. The basic rules of not being confusing.
pretty much.
Yeah.
And when those rules get shattered by all this fragmentation and noise,
Yeah.
well, it forces us, the audience, to do all the heavy lifting.
Right. We become active participants, almost analysts ourselves, trying to rebuild the meaning from what the source calls the ruggle. That's a great word for it.
Isn't it? You have to guess, you have to infer, piece together what might have been meant from the rubble of the transcripts. It's the total opposite of just passively listening.
And some sources push that fragmentation even further, almost to an artistic limit, it feels like.
Definitely. That neuritis source you sent is a perfect example. It's just 2 words, nuditous, new note. That's it. That's the entire text.
It's incredibly minimal, isn't it? Like no sentence structure, zero context, nothing around it.
And yet, as the analysis from your source points out really perceptively, that extreme minimalism is actually incredibly generative. It doesn't give you meaning.
It prompts it.
Exactly. It prompts it. Those 2 words suddenly stop being just a random note and become this launch pad for thought.
So you start wondering, what could it mean? Is it just a fleeting idea someone quickly jotted down? A placeholder for something much bigger they haven't fleshed out yet?
Or could it be like a deliberate artistic statement, a symbol of a really stripped-down minimalist style?
Or maybe it's just pointing towards potential. The very act of writing new note signals the start of something, even if we have absolutely no idea what that something is.
It's the possibility that becomes the focus. The power isn't really in the specific words nuditous, new note, but in the void around them, the potential they represent.
And the effort they demand from you, the listener, the reader, to project your own ideas onto them, to fill that void.
It perfectly shows how this material often doesn't just present ideas, it throws the question right back at you. Like, what do you connect with new notes? When have you felt that urge to jot down a quick thought that feels important but isn't fully formed? What potential does that simple act hold in your life?
And this isn't just happening in notes or dialogue transcripts either. We see this kind of deconstruction of language happening within the music itself, according to the sources. That Fra source, the one analyzing song remixes.
Oh yeah, that one was interesting. It shows how the transcriptions can just dissolve into almost pure sound fragments.
Like the phrase, love somebody, just breaking down into raw phonetic sounds, almost gibberish if you try to read it.
And the analysis correctly points out, yeah, this is partly because automatic transcription struggles, especially with electronic music, heavy vocal effects, loops. The tech just can't parse the intended words through all that processing.
But then the analysis asks the crucial question. Is it only a technical limitation? Or is the artist actually using it? Are they leaning into that breakdown as an artistic choice?
That's where it gets really fascinating. And the analysis seems to lean towards it being deliberate, that the voice is being treated not as a way to convey semantic meaning,
But as a pure sound element, totally deconstructed.
exactly. The voice becomes just another texture in the sonic landscape, like reduced to rhythm, timbre, like another instrument in the mix almost.
Yeah. So what's striking when you look at these first few examples together, buzzword bingo, Nerwinist, Fra, is how consistently language is being pushed, distorted, broken. Sometimes technology is part of it, sure, but often it feels intensely deliberate.
It's treated like raw material, doesn't it? Something malleable, something to be manipulated, explored, maybe even celebrated in its brokenness, or, as we'll probably get into, maybe even used as a weapon.
Which brings us nicely to the more playful side of using language as raw material, though still challenging. That Frillin source is a fantastic example of this, lighter side. The description sets it up really well. The music itself is apparently calm, maybe even hypnotic.
Creates this really soothing kind of atmosphere.
Yeah, but then the text, the words laid over it are the complete opposite. It's described as this chaotic, almost nonsensical flood of really unusual German words, often old-fashioned, maybe even made up, definitely silly-sounding ones.
Phrases like flibbertig, bibbit, climb, Quotas not go full pants, Muppets, crack. It's just a verbal onslaught of weirdness.
And the title itself, Furlough Pants. The analysis says that translates roughly to nonsense or a trifle.
Yeah, something trivial, unimportant. So the title itself is like a key, isn't it? Almost a little warning sign. Hey, don't come looking for deep logical meaning here. This isn't about conveying a clear message in the traditional sense.
So what is the point then? If it's not about meaning, what are they doing?
Well, the analysis suggests the focus is entirely on the sound of these words. Their texture, their rhythm, when you string them together like this, it's described as having a playful, almost dadaistic effect.
Ah, daddyism.
Right.
Like that whole early 20th century thing, embracing irrationality, nonsense, often as a protest against logic and order.
Exactly. It feels like they're channeling that spirit just reveling in the pure sound and strangeness of the German language, treating words not as units of meaning, but as like abstract objects or sound events, just to be tossed around for the sheer fun of it.
Pure linguistic play, anarchy, just for the joy of the sounds.
Now, contrast that kind of lighthearted chaos with the approach we see described in the Hort source. Here, the language is also experimental, but the analysis describes it completely differently. It's not silly, it's complex, full of hidden meaning, riddles, even encrypted texts.
And those invented words mentioned, Hort's first planar shikarani, they don't sound random, do they? They sound constructed, deliberate, maybe even coded somehow.
Exactly. This isn't just an invitation to play along with nonsense. The source notes highlight that the artist here is, like, throwing down a gauntlet. They celebrate the difficulty of their language, almost bragging about their highest-level rhymes, calling themselves innovative, even claiming a title like Rap Wonderplatz, a rap marvel or phenomenon.
And the most direct challenge comes when they apparently speak straight to the listener. If you don't understand, then that is your weakness.
Wow. Okay, that completely shifts the dynamic, doesn't it? It goes from playful invitation to a direct demand for intellectual effort, for capability from you, the listener.
It really forces you to ask, what's the intention here? Are they trying to cultivate some kind of elite audience, only those willing or able to put in the mental work to decode this complex language?
Or, as the analysis suggests, maybe it's a deliberate barrier, a conscious choice designed to push away the casual listeners and force deeper, more engaged interaction from those who stick around.
It absolutely makes you confront your own perceived limits when you're faced with art that's intentionally difficult or opaque. It's not just asking for your attention, it's demanding your intellectual investment.
Which feels different again from the kind of linguistic intensity we see described in Zung und Schatt. That source focuses on German tongue twisters.
Ah, the classics.
Yeah, it frames this intense wordplay less as a riddle or deliberate complexity and more like a form of linguistic sport.
Definitely. We're talking about famously difficult German tongue twisters here. They are a real workout for your mouth and for your brain trying to keep up.
The analysis highlights the sheer density of the language, the playfulness involved, sure, but also the intense linguistic gymnastics required to actually perform them. It's about pushing the boundaries of phonetics, rhythm, even syntax, how sentences are usually built.
To create those wonderfully difficult phrases, like the examples given, Anna Eben's ass or Fleghintel.
Phrases that really challenge the physical act of speaking. It's pushing language to its absolute phonetic and structural limits. The analysis calls it a parkour runner approach to words, which I love.
That's great. It's about skill, speed, precision.
But the source also notes that even amidst all that technical difficulty and speed, there are still these moments of unexpected poetry popping up.
Yeah, little glimpses of beauty woven into the acrobatics, like that phrase, fuel, heal, weightless. It's a really resonant image that just appears there, despite the focus being on the phonetic challenge.
So if we try to connect these different ways they're using language, we've got Frillin using it for playful sound and chaos, Hortz using it for deliberate, challenging complexity and demanding effort, and Zungeschatt elevating it to this intense, skillful linguistic sport.
What seems to unite them is that they all move away from language being just a simple, transparent tool for conveying clear meaning.
Right. They decenter the meaning itself and foreground other aspects. The sound, the rhythm, the structure, the sheer effort required to speak or understand it, the act of manipulating language itself.
It paints this picture of language not just as a vehicle for communication, but as this dynamic, pliable, really powerful raw material. Something to be shaped, distorted, explored, celebrated.
Or, in some cases, used destructively.
And that brings us, maybe inevitably, to the darker, more aggressive uses of language that really stand out in these sources. Language not as creation or play, but as a weapon, something that leads to a total breakdown of communication.
Yeah, this feels like a pretty harsh turn from the playful stuff.
It is. The Hans Deutsch edition source is probably the most visceral example of this. The analysis nails it. The core theme is just relentless, extreme, repetitive, vulgar language. It doesn't just color the interaction, it basically replaces any other form of communication. It's less like dialogue, more like a sonic assault.
Just a seemingly endless barrage of insults and really crude terms. Things like shy, Carol, Arschoff, Vixer, Drexo, Futzes, Heranson, Piznella, Arschazicht. It's undeniably brutal. very aggressive.
And the source analysis digs into how this language functions. It suggests it's not just random swearing, it's being used purely as a weapon, constantly escalating. It becomes the only way characters interact, the only kind of relationship they seem to have.
The analysis uses this term inmat, which seems specific to this context, but the idea is clear. This extreme vulgarity works to disempower people. It strips away their identity, their social roles.
Exactly. You see figures like a pastor being reduced to terms like a priest, pig priest, arch creature, a scrawler, lick arch, lick ass. The characters in this world become little more than the insults they throw around. They are, as the analysis puts it, reduced but plative, simplified down to their aggression, yet somehow striking because of it. It's not just name-calling, it feels like verbal demolition, using language to completely break down the opponent.
And there's that really bizarre, almost clinical observation within the analysis, isn't there? That even within this constant stream of abuse, there's a note suggesting that some terms might still be perceived as crossing a line, even in that reality. Like Archer apparently wicking probably went too far.
That little detail is genuinely chilling. It suggests that even in this world built on linguistic violence and smashing boundaries, there might still be some kind of perceived limit, a sense that some insults carry more weight or actually go too far. It's a strange, dark kind of nuance.
And it connects to that fascinating meta-commentary in the analysis of haunts, another source that seems related. The analysts themselves, just by immersing themselves in this extreme language, reported feeling briefly infected, like they risked losing the thread.
That really underscores the force of this style, doesn't it? It's not just words on a page or sounds in a track. It carries a tangible impact. It can actually affect you, the listener, the analyst, in a way that feels destabilizing, maybe even potentially harmful.
It definitely points to a potential risk involved in engaging deeply with material that is deliberately aggressive or chaotic. It's like it can almost contaminate the observer a little bit.
So if we try to gather all these threads about language, we've seen it used for playful creation and challenging norms in Frillin, for deliberate, demanding complexity in Hortz, as a high-skill sport in Zungeschit, and then for pure destructive aggression and the total annihilation of communication in Hans.
It really makes you wonder, is that aggressive language also a way of pushing language to its limits, but specifically in a way that deliberately dismantles meaning and connection, rather than exploring or rebuilding it?
That seems like a key insight here. It's using the immense power of words, which can be terrifying, right? Not to build understanding or create beauty, but to break things apart, including the very possibility of talking to each other meaningfully.
This intense focus on language, its power to construct, challenge, or destroy, feels absolutely fundamental to understanding the world described in these sources. And maybe that focus on language itself leads us naturally to think about who is speaking it and the ideas of identity, group belonging that seem so central.
Which brings us really smoothly into the next huge theme that just permeates these sources, that complex dance between identity, especially a really strong sense of collective identity, and various forms of rebellion against different kinds of control.
Yes, there's a very clear, very deliberate picture painted of a core group identity. The Dust Collective source is quite explicit about this, isn't it? The self-image of Dosa seems built on ideas of cohesion, the absolute centrality of the group, concepts like eternal on-connected hearts unity.
The name collective itself doesn't feel like just a label. It feels programmatic, like a core statement of who they are. And the source mentions things like Donkey's Freddy Frey shaft, which sounds like some kind of thank you note, an acknowledgement of gratitude for friendship among the guys.
It emphasizes real, personal connection. And the GRD source, the one analyzing that DR Not track, reinforces this by connecting the music directly to a real friend circle or network. It even names a specific person, Mike, as being part of this circle.
So even though some of the content gets really abstract or bizarre, there seems to be this grounding in actual relationships, shared experiences.
That feeling gets amplified by the recurring mention of Peter's Bar. The source gives it this almost mythical, legendary status for the group, doesn't it? It's not just a physical place. It's defined by community, belonging, a place where they understand each other, maybe without needing many words.
Right, like that reference to the UUA sound, maybe acting as some kind of in-group code or a shared soundtrack just for them.
Exactly. It's described as an anchorage, a forbidden paradise, specifically for this collective. It seems tied to a shared history, maybe youthful rebellion, perhaps even shared negative experiences with the law, given that Nicked Gun's legal hint mentioned.
So it functions as this personal landmark, probably idealized by memory, becoming more of a symbol than just a specific bar, a symbol of their shared identity, their bond, and perhaps a rebellious past or present outside the mainstream.
And that sense of being outside, of having this distinct group identity, feeds directly into the strong current of rebellion and anti-establishment feeling that runs through so many of these sources. Go back to the Dust Collective analysis. It highlights their clear stance against the established.
Yeah, they talk about a sound war revolution, breaking chains. They see themselves as kings of the underground, explicitly stating they're down with the system. Authenticity and rebellion seem absolutely key to their identity.
And then Hupensett adds this really fascinating satirical layer to that anti-establishment theme. He uses parody to critique power and blind obedience. That Tolmananish tirade section with its aggressive nationalism and absurd imagery like cannon and but butter cannons instead of butter. It's clearly mocking militarism and blind patriotism.
The song itself sounds really clever in how it captures that seductive rhythm of nationalistic fervor, the idea of collective strength. I for all, one for all strength off Dasa, marching stiffly onto the street. But then, it subtly slips in this doubt and fear underneath the bravado. Harrisons and hearts are heavy.
So, a critique of how easily that group feeling, that collective identity, can be manipulated and twisted for authoritarian ends. It's like a warning about the dangers of mindless unity and obedience. It shows a potential dark side to collectivism itself.
That's a really sharp observation. Now, Joyride feels much more direct in its rebellion, doesn't it? Less satirical, more like a straight-up confrontation with authority figures, specifically the police.
Yes, definitely. The defiance there is aimed right at departments like the LAPD, SFPD, NYPD, even mentioning an individual named Emil. There's this deep skepticism, maybe disillusionment with the justice system, expressed in lines like, "Thought I knew justice, I got me sick, you just been busted."
The whole narrative of that song seems centered on living outside conventional rules and authority. The protagonist basically says knowing the rules ain't part of his program. It feels like a very personal, high-stakes kind of rebellion, maybe born out of really negative experiences with the system.
And then we have the Club Guard source, which takes an old mythical figure, the clubman, who was traditionally a kind of helpful but also sometimes mischievous spirit associated with ships.
And totally updates him, reimagines him from the modern city, even for cyberspace.
Exactly. He becomes this kind of system insider figure who understands the weaknesses of power structures. He's cast as a rebel fighting against these invisible dark forces, these modern demons like Krampus or a dark version of the Sandman.
So his traditional skills, observation, adaptability, operating unseen, they get repurposed for digital age rebellion, fighting against modern forms of control, but from inside the system itself.
It's a really fascinating way to use old folklore to look at contemporary struggles against power and control.
Okay, so we've got this strong emphasis on collective identity, various forms of rebellion, satirical, direct, mythical, against authority in the established system. This sets up a really clear tension with another major theme that just looms large in these sources, this pervasive sense of control, surveillance, and maybe the loss of human agency or even humanity itself under these systems.
Yes, absolutely. That source identified by the long alphanumeric name, ACT39.
The one focused on omnipresent control.
That's the one. It plunges you deep into this really chilling vision of omnipresent control. It talks about surveillance cameras everywhere, systems constantly processing massive amounts of data, the implementation of predictive policing algorithms.
It's a pretty dystopian picture of a system that isn't just watching, but actively learning, adapting, becoming this ever more powerful and intrusive force, an evolving power, as the source puts it.
And the consequences are depicted as deeply personal and suffocating. Privacy just dissolves. Your life becomes transparent. The individual is constantly feeling the breath of control with every breath.
The source even has lines that suggest a real shift in power towards non-human systems. Superiority of machines, of code. There are even literal threats that seem to come from the system itself, like, our creation, we rise up, dare to fight us, and you will lose.
It creates this powerful feeling that maybe man is no longer the boss. The humanity has perhaps already lost control to the very technological systems it built. It portrays technological control not just as an issue, but as this suffocating dominant thing that defines existence.
And then there's the figure of Giraffe, the count.
Yeah.
He feels so different, almost mythic.
Yeah, like a mythic embodiment of destructive control, but focused through this single, terrifying individual. He's presented as the ultimate scapegoat.
The person who gets all the blame.
Yeah.
All responsibility for destruction and suffering in this world seems to land squarely on him, and he's this incredibly paradoxical figure, described as a genius scientist, a brilliant magician capable of amazing things.
But whose immense power is used only for destruction and suffering. His stated goal is literally total world subjugation, torment, and destruction. He represents control weaponized to its absolute, purely evil extreme, a single terrifying point of destructive power.
Which, in a way, connects back to that critique in Hupensett, doesn't it? The idea that unchecked power, whether it's authoritarian nationalism or an all-powerful tyrant like Giraffe, is inherently destructive, poisoned by ambition or greed or hate.
It absolutely echoes that warning. And even a source that seems as mundane as Putson, the one about cleaning, can be read as this kind of micro-level reflection of the broader theme of control. The cleaning isn't just about tidiness, it's described as clinical, obsessive.
And it hints at a deeper purpose, right? Hiding something, trying to banish shadow laughter, sweep away dust of questions, covering up dark spots.
The cleaning becomes almost compulsive, like a ritualistic act. It feels like an exorcism against existential dirt. It's control applied inwardly, obsessively, to suppress something perceived as messy or dangerous within oneself.
And that line from the source, see a liver groin in Orden, the soul buried in order. That's a really striking image. It suggests that this extreme external control, this obsessive imposition of order, might be an attempt to suppress inner chaos, uncomfortable truths, maybe even vital parts of one's own soul.
A personal battleground for control that mirrors the huge systemic one depicted in ACT-39. It's chilling when you put it that way. And amidst all this, we have MWF-502. Now, that source is full of details about weapons, drinking, personal feuds, bizarre tech like butt bomb techniques.
Right, all that specific, sometimes strange detail.
But it's also absolutely saturated with rampant conspiracy theories, chemtrails, soldier staff, specific military tech terms mixed with paranoia.
It paints a picture of a worldview just steeped in paranoia and confusion, where reality is seen as being manipulated by unseen, dangerous, controlling forces operating behind the scenes.
Yeah, a reality where control is hidden, unpredictable, and feels deeply threatening from basically all angles.
So within this landscape, powerful collective identity, fierce rebellion, and these looming oppressive forms of control, tech, tyranny, personal obsession, the sources also give us glimpses of individuals struggling within or against these forces, and these individuals often seem really complex, contradictory, maybe even broken.
The GRD source gives us a great example with Florian GRD. The analysis describes him as just being full of contradictions. He's apparently a technically unskilled SC guy, bad with computers, unbagged.
But also a joyful, overheated botanist who's passionate about plants.
Right. And an aggressive sticker vandal. That's a lot of disparate traits packed into one person. Makes you wonder, like the analysis suggests, is this a genuine reflection of a complex individual, or is it a deliberate, conscious staging of opposites by the artist?
It definitely challenges your assumptions about who this person is. Then that phrase, eternal wandering, linked to him suggests maybe a lack of a fixed identity, a constant search for where he belongs. Or maybe just an inability to reconcile all these different parts of himself.
The Joyride source also portrays a really layered individual. There's the toughness that comes from hardship, hard time built me up strong, and the need to hustle, operate outside the rules. But there's also this duality, needing power to survive, yet being forced into flight, vulnerability. The analysis hints at potential disillusionment or personal tragedy connected to encounters with authority, which adds this layer of tragic depth to his rebellion. His identity seems fundamentally shaped by conflict, by the systems he's fighting against.
For Borgie Melody feels more introspective, more inward-looking. It depicts someone seeking freedom, but finding it in isolation, in coldness, in a cold, nocturnal city.
That line, "Fry yet I am free," sounds defiant on the surface, but the analysis points out it's a very particular kind of freedom, an individualistic freedom with a high price. It's described as a tightrope walk between self-determination and self-destruction.
And the ending of that analysis sounds pretty bleak. Physical decline, strength failing, but still, even in that harsh state, there's this search for rest, last happiness. It's got this deep internal conflict, a real tragic feel. It resonates a bit with that reinterpreted clubman figure, someone who is a slave, pursued, carrying burdens, even while trying to embody rebellion.
And even Giraffe, while he's mostly this external force of control, represents a profoundly fractured identity, right? A brilliant creator whose genius is twisted into pure destructiveness, An extreme, almost mythological example of a broken self.
So let's try to connect these threads a bit. We have this strong collective identity, this powerful current of rebellion, and then this pervasive threat or reality of control.
Yeah.
How does the pull of the collective, the energy of rebellion, interact with these complex, sometimes contradictory or broken individual identities?
Yeah, like is the strong collective a refuge, a shelter from the pressures of control and the chaos of the world? Or is it primarily a base, a launching pad for the rebellion itself?
And how do the critiques of these huge control system surveillance tyrannical figures relate to the very personal struggles we see, like the obsessive control of cleaning in Putson or the search for isolated freedom in Verborgi Melody? Are these big systemic issues just reflected on a smaller personal scale, or are they fundamentally different kinds of battles?
And what about those figures who operate outside the rules, like in Joyride, or those who try to subvert the system from within, like the Clubman? Are they genuinely successful in resisting? Or are they ultimately defined, maybe even trapped, by the very systems they fight against? As with so much in these sources, there just aren't simple, easy answers provided.
Not at all. And maybe that complexity, that lack of easy answers, ties back to the way the artists seem to challenge the audience, especially in sources like Hortz or the Dust Collective stuff, by demanding active engagement. Maybe that's another layer of the anti-establishment stance, a pushback against just passively consuming things, demanding that you, the listener, exert your own mental control and effort to grapple with the material.
Which brings us perfectly into what might be the most crucial underlying theme across all these sources, the absolutely indispensable role of you, the listener, in engaging with this entire complex universe. The sources don't just present information, they actively pull you in, often demanding your participation.
It's woven throughout the material, isn't it? As we've already seen, the sources themselves repeatedly pose direct questions right to you, the person experiencing them.
Exactly. What do you connect with New Notes? What is your limit for artistic expression? What makes your places special? What might your cleaning hide? These don't feel like just rhetorical flourishes. They feel like genuine prompts for personal reflection, using their themes as a springboard for your own thoughts.
And beyond the direct questions, the very nature of the material, its fragmentation, its ambiguity, its complexity, its deliberate difficulty in places like Hortz or buzzword bingo, it forces you to be active, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to participate in constructing the meaning. You must fill in the gaps. You are pushed to interpret what's happening, whether you want to or not sometimes.
Whether it's trying to make sense of the broken transcript in buzzword bingo or imagining the possibilities suggested by just Nuditous New Note or trying to decipher the digital noise and description errors in that Dodd source, it requires your mental effort, your imagination, your willingness to grapple with the uncertainty. It's fundamentally not passive listening.
And remember that intentional challenge we talked about with Hortz and the Dust Collective. The artists aren't making it easy on purpose. They are, in a way, demanding that you engage actively, critically, maybe even unconventionally, to really get what they're doing. Like with Zungasha, they present this intense linguistic sport, and they challenge you to look past the initial difficulty and see the underlying structure, the skill, the creativity. It's an invitation, yeah, but it's also a demand to meet the work on its own terms.
What's also really striking, and something we touched on earlier, is how consistently the sources seem to pivot from describing their own internal world, their struggles, their realities, to asking you to reflect on your own life. They use their themes like a mirror for your experience.
Yeah, that's so true. How does fragmentation change your perception? When faced with a flood of broken information, how do you process it? What do you link to a new note? What unformed idea is significant in your life right now? How does music or media shape your attitudes? When you're presented with extreme content, how does it actually affect you?
Who or what steers your life? What systems of control, seen or unseen, influence your choices? What makes your places special? What locations hold that kind of mythical, anchor-like quality for you? What might your routines hide? What uncomfortable truths are you maybe sweeping away in your own life?
It really feels like this whole deep dive, guided by the sources you've shared, isn't just an exercise in understanding the world of the Dosa Crew. It's also presented as this lens through which you can examine your own experiences with language, identity, reality, control, and that constant struggle we all have to make sense of complex information.
But woven into the strong emphasis on the listener's active role in personal reflection, there's also that clear note of caution, isn't there, about the process of deep analysis itself.
Yeah, we saw it with the Han source, right? The analysts feeling briefly infected by the aggressive language. It got to them.
And most powerfully, I think, in that meta-commentary from the MWF 502 analysis, the analysts describing themselves feeling unsettled, risking losing the thread, suggesting that by becoming so absorbed in decoding the mysteries of that strange, disturbing world, they risked becoming empty holes themselves.
That specific detail.
Yeah.
It feels like more than just a plot point within the narrative or a note on the analytical process. It feels almost like a warning, maybe a metaphor, for the potential cost of constantly trying to process overwhelming, fragmented, and sometimes deeply disturbing information in our own world, too.
It speaks to a very real potential risk you take when you choose to dive deep into complex, chaotic, or unsettling material, whether it's art like this or just the flood of information we face every single day. There's a chance of getting lost, right? Of being changed in uncomfortable ways by what you immerse yourself in.
So pulling all these threads together, the listener, you, is positioned not as some passive recipient of this material. You are the active integrator, the one who has to grapple with the fragmented language, navigate the tension between collective identity and individual struggle, confront the pervasive forces of rebellion and control, and try to make sense of these strange, often dangerous-feeling realities.
It's a constant challenge to interpret, a recurring invitation to reflect on your own life, and crucially, the persistent hint of the potential risk involved in the very act of engagement. Your role is central and active. The meaning you find isn't just inherent in the sources, it's significantly shaped by your engagement, your interpretation, your effort to build understanding from all these fragments.
We have definitely journeyed through a fascinating, strange, often contradictory, but somehow deeply interconnected world revealed by this collection of those accrued sources you shared with us.
We've seen language used in ways that challenge, play, and destroy. We've explored the tensions between group identity and individual complexity, between fierce rebellion and pervasive control. And we've navigated realities that just blur the lines between the everyday, the mythical, the surreal, and sometimes the outright horrific.
And woven throughout all of it, the material has consistently pulled you into the center of the experience, asking you to interpret, inviting you to reflect on your own life, and even suggesting there might be a personal cost to diving this deep into complexity and chaos.
Making sense of this intricate tapestry, finding the connections, grappling with the meaning, it really is inherently an active process, isn't it? It asks you to lean in, to work, to reflect, which, when you stop and think about it, is a lot like trying to navigate the complexities of information and reality in our own lives, where we're constantly bombarded with fragmented, sometimes contradictory, often overwhelming input.
And building on those powerful themes we saw, particularly control, fragmentation, the blurring of reality, and especially that striking caution about the risk of analysis found in sources like MW502.
Yeah.
The material leaves us, and you, the listener, with a really profound and perhaps unsettling final thought to carry away.
Which is?
It's the idea that when you choose to dive deeply into material this complex, this fragmented, and potentially this disturbing, the sources themselves seem to suggest there's a real risk involved, a risk that goes beyond just intellectual effort, the risk of maybe losing something of yourself in the process of analysis.
They pose in a way that feels like it echoes far beyond just the specific world of the Dosa crew and resonates with our own struggles to process the world. They pose the question, if you look too deeply into the abyss, right? Or if you get too lost in following the intricate patterns, decoding the mysteries, immersing yourself in potentially destabilizing realities, do you risk becoming an empty hole yourself, losing track of who you were or why you even started looking in the first place?
It leaves us, and you, with this really challenging question to chew on. How do you engage deeply with complex, perhaps unsettling worlds, whether they are artistic creations or aspects of our own reality, and still stay grounded? How do you remain yourself, maintain your own identity, while trying to understand forces that sometimes feel designed to pull you apart or consume you entirely?
Thank you so much for providing this incredible, truly mind-expanding collection of material, and for joining us on this deep dive into the world hinted at by the Dosa Crew sources. We really hope it's given you some valuable insights and perhaps sparked some new questions for you to continue exploring on your own.
Until next time.